Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our live program. Can everyone see me out there? All right, welcome. My name's Lisa Hoover. I'll be your host this evening, and tonight we have something really special. Tonight we have taken the virtual road and we're now joining our hike and sip program in this new platform. So if you are a fan of the popular summer hike program, stay tuned. We have a lot of fun in store. We have special guests with us this evening. We have Constance Taylor and Claudia Munoz from the East Bay Regional Park District. And tonight we're going to be talking about foraging the forest for edibles. So make sure you watch because I'm sure we're all going to learn something about what to eat or what not to eat in the forest. Before we get started, just a few announcements. If you like this program, at the event link on our Facebook page, you can actually bid on an opportunity for a live hike and sip program for you and 10 friends. So there's still time, there's 3 days left to join us on an excursion for an unforgettable experience. Now, to start our party, I'm going to lead off with a signature cocktail, starting with the blackberry fruit. So, on the event page, you'll find our recipe sheet where we're going to give all the secrets away so that you can join us. And we're going to feature 4 different cocktails from edibles in the forest. So, without further ado, let's get started with blackberries. Hi, folks. We're just having a little bit of technical difficulty getting our loop to play here, but it will be just a moment, so please stand by. Hi, Lisa here in the Chabot kitchen, and I'm going to show you two great ways to enjoy the blackberries of the season. Are you ready? Let's get started. Download all 4 of tonight's recipes from our event page. Here's what you'll need to make the blackberry rum fizz. 1 saucepan, 1 small grate strainer, 2 ounces of white rum, 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar, a potato masher, 2 tablespoons of fresh lime, and 6 ounces of unflavored sparkling water. To make the blackberry fizz, add 1 cup of fresh blackberries, 3/4 a cup of granulated sugar, and 1 cup of water to a saucepan. Simmer the mixture on low heat for 30 minutes while stirring frequently. Once the mixture starts to thicken, use a potato masher or the back of a wooden spoon to macerate the berries to release their juices. After 30 minutes, the mixture should be thick and bubbly with the consistency of syrup. Allow the mixture to completely cool. Extract the syrup from the berries by straining the liquid through a mesh sieve. You're going to love this. Any leftover liquid you can use as a pancake syrup or on hot biscuits. The possibilities are endless. Enjoy. Blackberries are characterized as fruit-bearing thorny plants which are part of the rose family. California is home to a few blackberry species. The most abundant is the invasive Rufus armenicus, commonly known as the Himalayan or the Armenian blackberry. It was brought to America in the mid-1830s. It's so invasive that it's considered by some to be a destructive weed. It's characterized by its 5-leaf pattern and large edible dark berries. Whereas the Western North American Rubus ursinus, commonly known by a suite of aliases, including the California blackberry, California dewberry, Douglas berry, Pacific berry, Pacific dewberry, and the trailing berry. Unlike the Himalayan blackberry, the Pacific has a 3-leaf growth pattern and smaller curved thorns and smaller berries. Now it's time to assemble the cocktail. Mix 6 ounces of sparkling water, 2 ounces of white rum, 2 tablespoons of lime, and 2 to 3 tablespoons of the blackberry syrup, depending on taste. Refrigerate any leftover syrup. To make the blackberry cordial, start with a double portion of the blackberry syrup recipe. After straining the liquid and berry mixture, add it to a half a liter of vodka. You can also add a fourth a cup of flavored brandy, which is optional. Store the liquid for 1 week before consuming. The flavor of the berries will be significantly enhanced. You want to finish the liquid within 1 month or add some citric acid to extend the shelf life of the cordial. All right, I'm back. I hope you enjoyed that recipe. There's more to come, so stay tuned. Once again, you can download each of tonight's recipes from the description on the Facebook link. So everything you need is right there. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to our special guest, starting with Constance Taylor from the East Bay Regional Park District. Hi, Constance.
Hello, thank you, Lisa. I'm excited to try that drink. That looks great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Like Lisa said, my name is Constance Taylor. I am a naturalist with the East Bay Regional Park District. And I also want to acknowledge that here in Alameda and Contra Costa counties, we are on Ohlone land. And I'll be talking about that more later because it is very relevant when it comes to edible plants and edible landscapes in the Bay Area. So when we're talking about the East Bay Regional Park District, here is a map of all of our parks. We are only in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. We have 73 parks in the area, including Redwood Regional Park. And we are a special government district, which means that we are our own thing. We're not city parks, we're not county, we are not state, we are not federal. We are our own special government district, and we are actually paid for through property tax dollars. That's where we get a lot of our funding. So these are literally your parks. They are paid for with public funds. So please come out and visit us at all of them. There are many, many parks to explore. So we've got 73 parks within the 2 counties. And it is also important to note that though this is an edible plant program, there is no collecting plants or any other materials in East Bay Regional Parkland. It's all protected areas. However, the plants we're going to be talking about today are really common backyard plants and urban plants as well. So you can find these plants all over the place. And today, I'm really going to be going into the history of edible plants in California because the species and amounts of free-range edible plants we have in the Bay Area has changed significantly over time. And that has everything to do with what cultures are the main stewards of the land and how human migration and colonization has changed the ecology of the area. This is a map of different Ohlone territories in the Bay Area. And when we're talking about biodiversity, ecology, and edible landscapes in California, it's impossible to talk about these things without also talking about indigenous stewardship, past and present. And just a brief note, when we talk about Ohlones, we're actually talking about many different cultures and languages. Before colonization, the Bay Area was a very heavily populated area and had a wide diversity of indigenous cultures, and that includes different languages, different religious beliefs, and different tribal organizations. One thing that many tribes did have in common is that they worked closely with the land to create this incredibly verdant environment where people could get anything they needed. And life here was very, very good pre-colonization. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. This is an illustration of an Ohlone village pre-colonization. And you can see kind of at the bottom of the picture, you have some tule boats and it's right next to the water. So around the bay, villages were often near the water since it was the best of all worlds. You had the bay right next door, so you have fishing and you can gather shellfish like clams and oysters and mussels. You can hunt water birds. And upland, you have larger game as well as, of course, plants. And when the Spanish first came to the Bay Area in the 1700s, people wrote about it as if it were the Garden of Eden or the land of plenty. And it was a place where there was just food everywhere you looked. There was game everywhere. It was rumored that there were, it was written about rather, that there were flocks of birds so massive that they would blot out the sun. So the amount of life and diversity on this landscape was really astounding. And when Spanish came here, they wrote about it because they were so shocked by it. The land was not like this by accident. It wasn't like this because that's just how California happened to be. It was like this because there was a thousands of year old relationship between indigenous cultures and the land itself. So one of the things that indigenous cultures used for thousands of years and still use today is fire management. And this is not giant wildfires like we're seeing now. These are slow, cool, controlled burns. And it was used to burn off dead grass, dead trees, things that would otherwise build up and create more fuel for fires, which would eventually lead to a really big destructive wildfire. So these controlled burns were set often and regularly, and it was just a common part of landscape management. The interesting thing about this is when you do these slow controlled burns, it actually helps the land spring back even stronger. So these burns would happen and they would actually help different plants grow. You would have grasses that would spring back and have these nice green shoots, which would bring deer and other animals to the area that you could hunt. And it would also clear the land. So you didn't have like a ton of really skinny, narrow trees that were all kind of fighting for light and resources. You would have some strong, sturdy specimens, and then you would have a really verdant, lush undergrowth of many different plants. And that was California's famed oak savannas. So this is a painting from the mid 1800s, and this is kind of an illustration of what these natural oak savannas might have been like. It was almost like a beautiful garden landscape that you would walk through, and this was all done through land management practices of indigenous Californians. One of the plants you might find on this landscape is the California black oak, and this is the first edible plant we'll talk about today. This was the prized oak by Ohlone ancestors. You can see those acorns are nice and big and fat, and the meat was thought to be very, very sweet and rich and oily. So you could make a lot of delicious foods out of it. And acorns are a very important part of the indigenous diet, both in the past and present. Now it's used as a way to connect with culture versus a staple of a diet. But for ancestors, oaks were considered a staple. Now, black oaks don't create acorns every single year. So what do? Well, the coast live oak was the old trusty standby. The acorns are smaller, but they do tend to produce more often than the black oaks, and you can see they produce in abundance. And for oak trees and acorns, you do need to do a little bit of processing. You can't just kind of like crack open the acorns and then just eat the nut meat raw. So what people would do people would pound the acorns, and this is a way that people still process acorns today. And you take that acorn meal and you have to soak it in water. And this leaches out the toxins so you can eat it and not get sick. When there were low acorns or no acorns, people would turn to the California buckeye as a food source. And this was not considered the greatest of foods. I think acorns were far preferred from what I've read, because buckeyes, you have to soak them a little longer. They take a little bit more processing. And so this was not necessarily the favored food. It is a really, really amazing tree. However, it's one of the first trees to lose its leaves when summer starts to come, and it looks like it's dead all throughout summer. But that's actually an adaptation that many California plants and animals have, called estivation, which is essentially a summer hibernation. So the life form goes dormant, so it's not basically cooked and loses all its water during the heat of the summer. So when you see the tree start to lose its leaves, you know that summer is coming. And it's also one of the first trees to get its leaves back in the winter. So you can see these like cool little pear-like, let me get my arrow up here, sort of like pear-like things dangling off. Those are the seed husks, and then inside are one of these big old seeds. And they have these 5-leaved palmate structures as well to look for. And I apologize, I skipped by the acorns really fast. I got a little ahead of myself. But things to look for identification-wise for the coast live oak is you have these downward cupped, leathery, stiff leaves with these little pokey bits on the side here. And these are an evergreen tree, so they do not lose their leaves. They have leaves all year. And then when we're talking about the black oak, it's kind of this more sort of East Coast-ish looking oak. It has kind of little points on the ends of each of these segments here. And these trees do lose their leaves every year. So they're deciduous. So they're not going to have leaves during the fall or winter. And now we have the bay, which is a super fun plant. We're going to talk about this a little bit more during our hike, so I'm not going to go too much into detail here. You might recognize this from your kitchen cabinets. You can use this plant in cooking. It's considered a lot stronger than the European bay that we get in the grocery stores, so it's recommended that you use a little less. But there is a really delicious drink that you can make from the California bay as well that Claudia is going to talk about in just a little bit. So we've got the nuts and we've got the seeds. So what else was part of a traditional diet? Flower seeds were a really big part of it. Flowers grew in abundance, and flowers were another plant that fire helped a lot. It kind of cleared out the dead growth so little seedlings could get more sun. So we have 3 plants, red maize, tar plant, and owl's clover, that were very, very abundant. People would take seeds and mix them with lard and other things to make little seed balls called pinole. And so this was a nutrient-rich food that people commonly ate. There were also flower bulbs and flower corms that people ate. You might have heard of soap root. It's people would roast the bulb. It would also the fibers would be used for a lot of different things as well, like brushes. And then there are blue dicks as well. Corms are essentially little bulbs, but without the layers. So it's a little bit different than like a tuber, like a potato, or a bulb. It's kind of like a hybrid of those two things. And then, of course, grass seeds. Grass seeds were really common in indigenous diets as well, and were mixed in with the pinole. It's also, I always like to remind everybody, including myself, that grass seeds are a huge part of our diet today. I mean, how often do we eat rice and corn and wheat? If you've eaten any of that stuff recently, then you have been eating grass seeds. So purple needlegrass is our state grass. This was and is a grass that is in abundance in California landscapes today. This is, you look for the really long, these are called awns right here, and then kind of the purple tinged seed heads. These are really cool plants. They're a bunch grass, which is the type of native grass we have around California. And the taproot for these bunch grasses can grow way, way down into the earth, up to 12 to 15 feet, which is insane to get down to that water table. They're very, very drought resistant. And a single bunch of purple needlegrass can be very old. They can live to be, some people think, up to 100 years old for one bunch of grass. Whoa. And that is versus other non-native grasses like these wild oats. And I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail after we get back from Claudia. So when we get back from Claudia, I'm going to talk a little bit about how things changed once Europeans came to Ohlone land. And with that, it is drink time, and Claudia is going to tell us a little more about that.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Claudia. I'm also a naturalist with East Bay Regional Park District. And today we're going to start our sip and hike first or third drink with the roasted lemon and bay leaf hard lemonade. I've actually been drinking this most of the afternoon, but don't worry, it's really easy to make a non-alcoholic version, which is what I've been drinking. So if you're looking for that alternative, then that's also available to you. So I have here some lemon and bay leaves, and I'm very fortunate to have these growing in my backyard. And you've probably seen this tree. It grows a lot in our oak forests here in the Bay Area and throughout California. And it smells so good. It has this sweet, spicy scent to it. And so I'm going to be using this, the native bay laurel instead of the bay leaves that you find in the grocery store to make this drink, just to get it a little bit spicier, and also our lemon. So in the recipe, you start off by cutting your lemon into quarters, like so. And I actually have already pre-cut my lemons, and I have 3 bay leaves and 3 lemons that I have quartered in my baking dish, using a pie dish, but you just want to use a small baking dish. And you're going to preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And it'll cook for about 20 minutes until the lemons start turning a little bit brown. And I've actually already pre-cooked some of them. So I have my lemons here with the bay leaves that are nicely browned. And you're going to, I'm gonna move this out of the way. Have your pitcher ready. In the recipe, it has you scrape the baked ingredients into your pitcher, and then you mix in a cup of sugar, and it has you put in the other liquids in right away, but I find it's a little bit easier to mash everything up together if you do it before you add those liquids in. So I'm just gonna pre-mash it a little bit. Get all the lemon juices out, and you might get some little specks of the bay leaves, but that's fine. It just adds to the flavor. And once it's like pretty well mashed, I don't know if you can see, it's pretty well mashed in there. Then I'm gonna add 3 cups of water. And then I've measured out a cup and 2 tablespoons of vodka. And this you want to have really well mixed in there. In the recipe, it calls for very fine sugar. I just use, regular granulated sugar, and it dissolves. When you do mix it, my lemons have been sitting, and so everything's pretty cool to the touch. So you want to be careful with that if you're mixing in a glass container, that nothing's too hot. And once it's at room temperature, then you're gonna want to put it in the refrigerator so that it cools completely. So I actually have some that I've already made, but you're gonna want to strain this. So it's gonna sit in the fridge for a while till it's nice and cool, and then you'll use your strainer to strain it. Oh, actually, I forgot to mention something else. I actually put some raw ones in there too. So it gave it a little bit of a a more of like a spicy punch. So if you like the spiciness of the bay laurel, then you could put a couple extra in there just to like give it a little bit more of a flavor kick. So you're gonna want to strain your liquid out so that all the lemons and the bay leaves stay out of your mixture. And I have some that's already pre-strained, so I'll pull that out to show you. So this is, I still have an extra, I really like that flavor from the bay laurel. It came out really well in this lemonade. So here I have my lemonade liquid. And to make the cocktail, you get your glass, like every good naturalist. I have a old mayonnaise jar here that I'm going to drink out of. You're going to want to fill it with your ice. And then you're just going to pour in, I'm going to add some more ice in here, actually. You're just going to pour in some of your already strained out lemonade liquid. It's pretty sweet, so you'll do it to taste. And then it calls for 6 ounces of club soda. So I'm just gonna put in about half of a can in here. And then add an extra bay leaf for flavor. And you have your beautiful hard bay leaf lemonade. Delicious. Cheers. So now I'm gonna hand it back to Constance, who's gonna tell us a little bit more about some of our non-native introduced plants that are here locally in the East Bay Regional Parks.
Awesome. Thank you, Claudia. I have made the bay lemonade as well. And yes, I can vouch for it. It is delicious. And you can actually taste that bay in there, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to share my screen again. And where we left off, I was talking about some introduced plants and specifically about the oats. So if you'll remember, let's see, whoopsie, I'm trying to get back here. Whoop, there we go. Oh, there's drink time. Okay, so here we go. The wild oats, the non-native. So you might have, that might look familiar to you, like these 2 segments here that make up the seed head. So here we are looking at a field of those wild oats and a number of other introduced grasses as well. One of the things that I found really interesting when I first heard about this was that the Golden Hills of California are actually golden because of all of these introduced grasses, which is totally interesting. So we've got a number of introduced grasses. They look golden because most of the European grasses that have been introduced are annuals, which means that they grow and die every year. Whereas a lot of the California bunch grasses are evergreen, more or less. So if we had a hillside of California native bunch grass, it would be more like the gray-green hills of California versus the golden hills. So it's just, I think, a good reminder just to think about how much different additions from cultures and plants from other parts of the world can really change our landscape, because the Golden Hills are something that myself and I think a lot of other people kind of take for granted as part of the California landscape, but it's only been like this for a short period of time, like, 100+ years, which is not very long in the grand scheme of things. So these annual grasses were spread through European industries like cattle ranching. So that was a big change on the landscape as well. So what else happened? How else did the culture and the landscape change? Well, missions were a big part of it. This, unfortunately, was the beginning of a dark era for many Ohlone ancestors. Large numbers of people were enslaved by ranchers and the missions, and many cultural practices were suppressed. And this included things like not being able to do controlled burns and not being able to work with the land as people had been for thousands of years. before European colonization. And people would work with plants to get just about everything that they needed to entice game to come for hunting, other plant food, obviously, basket making materials, tools. So all of that was definitely suppressed during the mission period. Now, it's also important to note that Ohlone ancestors did fight back both covertly and overtly for their way of life and for their communities and cultures. Covertly, people worked to keep traditions alive by practicing things in secret, by running away, by continuing to share stories and traditions. And this can be seen in the strong Ohlone culture we have today in the Bay Area. Another interesting thing as far as the overt fighting back is this is actually reflected in the very architecture of the missions. A lot of missions have tiles on their roofs. Now, it wasn't always like that. A lot of the roofs used to be made of thatch. However, there was so much indigenous resistance, in which part of it was that flaming projectiles would be thrown on the roofs of these thatched roof missions, and the mission would burn down. And so eventually the architecture actually changed to repel the different resistance that was happening from indigenous communities. Now, there was another wave of massive change after the missions, and unfortunately, the mission era was followed by an even darker period of time for the Ohlone ancestors, and that was the gold rush. This gold rush there was a massive influx of new people coming, and unfortunately, it also ushered in an era of California state-sponsored genocide of indigenous people in the second half of the 19th century. And I bring this up because who was able to freely interact with the land has everything to do with our current landscape and the cultural relationships we have with ecosystems we live within. And that includes where and what kinds of edible plants we find on the landscapes, and also what we call them and whose history is reflected in a name. A great example of that is Indian lettuce or miner's lettuce. You might have heard of this, you might have seen it. It's a very, very common plant. It's a great edible. It's very succulent. It's very high in vitamin C. And there is at least one account in a history of San Francisco in which a doctor have said to have prescribed miner's lettuce as a cure or a preventative measure for for scurvy in miners. So the miner's lettuce kind of speaks to that era where there were a lot of new people here. Everything was go, go, go. People didn't know how to take care of themselves. And so they didn't really know the landscape or the plants to eat. And so because of that, there were, various diseases that occurred because of vitamin deficiency. However, Indian lettuce also points to the probability that people probably found out that this plant was edible because of the indigenous people living here and because Europeans learned from them. So the names that we call plants also tell part of the story. And there's also a number of introduced European species who have become part of the landscape. One of them that might look familiar to you is plantain, also called white man's footsteps because it tended to appear in places where Europeans colonized in North America. And this is a plant that was kind of folded into the plants that indigenous folks used in North America as well as the Bay Area. This is a really awesome plant. It has a lot of medicinal properties. It's also edible as a salad green. The leaves and the seeds are mucilaginous, which means that if you soak the seeds in water or if you crush up the leaves, it gets kind of like gooey, almost like okra. And so people would use this to thicken soups and stews. You can also just eat it. The leaves have a slight antimicrobial property, and so they were also used to help clean and disinfect and bandage wounds. So definitely keep an eye out for this. There's a couple of different types around the Bay Area. There are actually some native plantain species, but they're less commonly found in urban areas. So you kind of want to look for this little like flower tuft here, as well as leaves that grow close to the ground in like a rosette is what it's called, a rosette pattern. And look for parallel leaf veins. Another European plant that is very commonly found on the landscape are the mustards. Again, there's a number of different types of mustards around here. There are the yellow mustards and then kind of the pink wild radishes. These are super fun. They have these seed pods that can get really, really spicy. But if you pick them when they're young, they make a great addition to salads. You can also pickle them, which is great. You can also eat the flowers and you can eat the greens as well. So this is kind of the wild cousin to more cultivated vegetables that we have, like cauliflower and kale and broccoli. So it's all part of the brassica family. And one of the ways that you can identify mustards is that they tend to have, they all have 4 flower petals. So you can see on these little yellow flowers here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you can also see that on the radish really clearly right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And mallow, I love mallow. This is a really fun one. Also European, also a couple different species in the bay. These have these sort of wide, flat leaves that almost look like a lily pad, and you can see with the dog for scale, some species can get pretty big. Super common urban weed, very edible. The leaves and the seeds over here are edible, and some people call it the cheese wheel plant because when you peel that seed coating off of the seed, you get these little pumpkin looking seeds that have these wedge sections, kind of like, you know, if you cut a wheel of cheese. And these you can eat raw. They're delicious. They taste like peas. And they also have mucilaginous properties. So people have used them in stews almost exactly like okra to thicken things. So these can be eaten raw or cooked. And believe it or not, this is actually the plant that marshmallows were originally derived from. Marshmallows were originally a cough suppressant, kind of like a cough drop. And since you have that like sticky, gooey stuff that happens when you tear apart the mallow leaf, the sticky, gooey stuff would kind of help soothe your throat. So this is the progenitor to our more commonly known marshmallow that we can get in the grocery stores today. And we also have fennel. This is a plant that will be featured in our last drink of the night that we'll get to in just a little bit. Fennel is part of the carrot family. You want to look for these like umbrella. It's almost like an inside out umbrella. It's called an umbel. So this, and they often have yellow flowers. And one of the most distinctive things is their smell. So if you crush it up and it smells like black licorice, then you've got fennel. And they have these frond-like feathery leaves as well. Now, this is not to be confused with a toxic plant that is very, very common around here called poison hemlock. And this is also part of the carrot family. So they kind of look similar. They have that inside out umbrella looking flower head. But you'll notice the leaves look significantly different. They look almost like ferns. The other thing that is a dead giveaway is this red staining on the stems. People say that it is the blood of Socrates because this is how Socrates died. He was forced to drink a concoction of poison hemlock because he was corrupting the minds of the youth, according to the state government at the time. So the blood of Socrates, look for that, as well as these fern-like leaves. And of course, my favorite inedible, poison oak. This is a California native. I really love this plant for a number of reasons. It can give you a gnarly rash. I have gotten it many times. It is not fun. So definitely, if you're gonna be able to identify one plant in California, it should be poison oak. And I think Lisa's gonna talk a little bit more about this in the hike, but you wanna look out for the leaves of 3. But we also saw that blackberry has leaves of 3. So something else to look for is the asymmetry of the leaflets here. So you'll notice that this side here looks quite different from the other side. The right side of the leaflet often looks different from the left side. So that's one thing to look for. And it has these cool little pumpkin-like berries as well. They're green, and then when they get dry during the end of the season, they turn white. Poison oak is a really, really important plant in the California landscape. It is an incredibly important food source for many animals. Many animals live in the bushes as well, so it's a great habitat. It also prevents erosion. It's a great nursery plant. So humans, as far as I know, are the only animals who have an allergic reaction to it. Other animals seem to be able to eat it and use it just fine. So if we were to remove this plant from our environment, we would actually be causing major, major problems in the ecosystem. So yay, poison oak. Just gotta, it's a plant to respect and understand. So I also wanted to introduce you to some groups who are working to improve our cultural relationship with food as well as the land. And one of them is Berkeley Open Source Food. This is a great project that's been going for a number of years. I highly recommend checking out their website, but they're all about identifying and using urban weeds as common salad herbs. So they have a guide that you can download and look at on their website. You can also buy a copy that's like very nicely printed. And they also have been doing research on things like whether or not heavy metals are absorbed into the leaves, if that is a concern in urban environments. So I highly recommend reading more about that because it's really interesting stuff. But this is a great place to start if you're wondering what are some common edible plants in the urban landscape. They also have some really handy do's and don'ts on their website as well when you're going foraging. Another organization you may have heard of is Cafe Aloni. Now, this is a restaurant, and the two people who started it are Indigenous, and they are working to bring back Ohlone food culture in the Bay Area and use it as a vehicle to talk about culture as well as our relationship with the land. And oopsie, sorry about that. My computer has been doing that. Whoops, sorry. Ugh, I hope that, there we go. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Here we go, Cafe Aloni. So they were at the University Press, but unfortunately that bookstore in Berkeley has closed because of COVID. And so one of the things that they're working on doing is putting together meal kits. And so this will be something that you can pick up, get a subscription to. It'll be made of locally gathered and seasonal ingredients. And I highly recommend checking out their website and Twitter feed for more updated information. But this is a really amazing project by two very amazing people, and it's worth getting involved in if you have not. There's also Planting Justice. This is an organization in East Oakland, and they're a group that installs edible permaculture gardens, and they also have a plant nursery, and they have a 4-acre farm and orchard in El Sobrante as well. So if you're looking to buy plant starts and edible food, they also have native edibles in their nursery as well. Planting Justice is a great organization to support. They work to empower people who have been impacted by mass incarceration and other social inequities, and they work to cultivate food sovereignty, economic justice, and community healing. They also have a very strong land ethic at their core, and they have purchased land to do their business on. And so they are paying the lease, and at the same time, they are also working with Segura Te. And Segura Te is an urban and Indigenous women-led land trust working to return Indigenous land to Indigenous people. So Planting Justice will be turning their land over to Segura Te for permanent Indigenous stewardship once it has been paid for. You might have also heard of the Shumi land tax, and that is a voluntary tax that you can pay to the land trust in order to support their mission. And to learn more about that, you can check out their website at Segura Te and also learn about the different projects that they're involved in. So the point of all of this is that people around here are doing really amazing things to make sure that the Indigenous culture of this land remains visible and influential. And since this is a culture that has been born on this land, it makes sense that one of the ways to do this is through food and edible plants, because this is a very literal representation of the land and the culture that sustains us. So that's something to keep in mind as we are foraging for edible plants in our environment. It's an amazing way to really build our relationship with the ecosystems that we live in and depend upon. So I highly recommend this as an activity. So I hope you learned a couple of new things. That is going to wrap it up for me, but we still have the hike, and we have one more drink for you that is made from fennel and almond. And these are plants that came from Europe who are now part of our landscape here. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Claudia.
Hi again, everyone. Claudia here. So I am gonna make a delicious fennel almond mocktail next. We did have a question about dandelion tea, and there are lots of different recipes for making dandelion tea out of the flowers and out of the roots. So I have had it, but I bought it at the store. So I should try making it myself sometime. So this next drink with almond and fennel, again, I'm lucky to have some of these things growing in my backyard. But this is what the fennel looks like, where I got the fennel seeds that I'm going to use to make this recipe. It flowers in the summer. Sometimes it starts as early as the springtime in May. But like Constance says, the flowers are kind of yellow. There aren't really any flowers left on it. Most of this has gone to seed, but you can see here that the seeds start off kind of like these little green pods, and then they become more tan colored, and they have these little stripes on them. And at some point, once they are dry, they come off really easily, which is why this plant is everywhere. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. It grows along our trails in the parks, but also in empty lots along the sidewalks. It's all over our urban landscape. It's a little bit different from the fennel that you'd buy in the grocery store. That fennel is a different species, and it grows a bulb that most of us use to cook with. For this fennel, what people cook with are the fronds. So you'd mince this up really fine and cook with that. And then, like I said, the seeds. So today, the drink that we're gonna make, we're gonna use the seeds for this recipe. And I collected a bunch earlier today. You can see them right here. And this almond fennel drink, you need fennel syrup, and the fennel syrup is really easy to make. You can measure out just a tablespoon of these seeds, which you can also purchase in the store if you don't have access to the fennel plant yourself. And you're going to use a spice grinder you can use a spice grinder to grind up the fennel seeds coarsely, but I have this pestle and mortar. So you're just going to crush it. Really, you're just trying to get the oils out of the seeds, smash them a little bit so that the flavor comes out of them for this next step. So I'm just going to smash them a little bit. I've actually pre-done this. So once you have them nicely ground, you want the seed pods opened up so that the oils, you'll be able to tell when the oils start coming out of the seed pods. You're gonna put them in a saucepan and add 1 cup of water, and then just bring it to a boil. And once it's come to a boil, then you can add it to 1 cup of sugar. So you're going to strain your boiled mixture into a cup of sugar. Like I said before, if you're going to be pouring into any glass, make sure it gets down to room temperature so that you don't accidentally break any glass. I've done that a few times in my life. So you're going to strain out the fennel seeds right into the sugar, and then you'll mix it all together, and it'll dissolve into your sugar. And this isn't dissolving as well because I do have this, it's pretty cold in my house. But once your sugar is dissolved, you'll be able to keep this refrigerated for up to a month. So you can continue to use it to make your drinks, mocktails for the future. So I actually have some that's pre-made and refrigerated right here. So this is the fennel syrup that I'm going to use to make this almond fennel mocktail. Uh, and have a glass that I'm using a regular glass, a glass with some ice in it. I'm just gonna measure out my ingredients. So you're gonna, it calls for 3/4 of an ounce of orgeat, which is this almond syrup, and that's about a tablespoon and a half. So I'm just gonna measure that, yeah, into my cup. And then the same quantity of the fennel syrup is gonna go in here. And then I pre-measured 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. It's gonna go in here. And then mix up the drink. And then I need 6 ounces of sparkling water. So I'm gonna pour in about half of this can of sparkling water. Mix it up a little bit more. If you have fennel, add it in for your little extra touch for your mocktail. And there you have it, folks, your almond fennel mocktail. Cheers. And now I'm gonna pass it back to Lisa. We're gonna have some announcements, and then we're gonna have a virtual hike where we can ID some of the plants that Constance told us so much about.
Wow, that's awesome. If you liked what we learned tonight from Constance and Claudia, can you give us some thumbs up in the chats? Let's see some love for them tonight. While you're doing that, just a couple of brief announcements before we go on to our hike. Don't forget, telescope viewing every Saturday night right here on Facebook Live. Next week, the ultimate lunar camping trip with Fareed. You don't want to miss it. And if you like our hiking program, we'll be back next month, right on September 18th. So don't forget to join us. We'll be back through the fall once a month with a new hiking theme and another hike and sip in the future. Um, if you like the Hike and Sip program, it's not too late. You can bid on a private experience for you and 10 friends. There's 3 days left. Follow the link at the bottom of our event page and make a bid because it's a great program and it's a lot of fun. Now, without further ado, give us just a moment to switch equipment here. Sit back and relax and let us do the walking. Here comes the virtual hike. All right, folks, we're just waiting for our connection to kick in here. Let's load that one more time since it's not playing.
Oh, hello, and welcome to Reinhardt Redwood Regional Park. My name is Morgan, and I'm a naturalist with the East Bay Regional Park District, and I'd like to have you join us today to discover some of the wild edibles that can be found throughout the Bay Area. So we're going to go on a hike along this trail, and a reminder that collecting in the East Bay Regional Park District is prohibited. So let's go.
Hi there. I've just emerged from a bay tree. Now, if you look at these leaves, you'll realize that this tree is everywhere. It's got these evergreen surfboard-shaped leaves, and if you smell it, it has a distinct peppery aroma. You might also recognize these leaves from your kitchen cabinet. This is a tree that's related to the bay that we buy in the grocery stores, but that type of bay is a European bay, and this is the Californian bay. And these leaves actually have more oil than the leaves you buy in the grocery store. So you can use these in cooking, and it's recommended that you use about half the amount because these are much stronger. Now, looking up here, you might notice these tiny little avocado-shaped fruits. Believe it or not, California Bay is actually related to avocado. They're both in the laurel family. And if you open up these fruits when they're ripe, you'll get a big round brown seed that you can actually roast. And if you roast it, you can eat it. And they kind of taste like coffee beans, similar to coffee beans as well. They have a mild stimulating effect.
Here's another one of our local edible species, the huckleberry plant. Let's take a look. Vixitium ovatum is native to North America. We know it as the California huckleberry, or the evergreen, or the winter huckleberry. It's a fruiting shrub that produces tiny, dark autumn fruit. It's been used by native peoples for centuries, and it's typically one of the sweetest berry varieties and one of my personal favorites.
Hi, My name's James. I'm one of the naturalists with the East Bay Regional Park District. So behind me here we have black elderberry, wonderful flowering tree. Right now it's in berry form, so here we are in August, but springtime, big white crown of flowers. Traditionally the flowers can be boiled and made into a simple syrup called elderberry saft in the northern European traditions. These little berries here aren't too good just raw. You have to kind of squish them up and get rid of the seeds and the skins, but a wonderful source of vitamin C and been used in California for more than 10,000 years through traditional means. The tree itself also has lots of cool uses. You can use it to help start fires, whittling the two sticks together with maybe paired with buckeye tree, a few other things. You can make flutes and you can make all kinds of clapper sticks and musical instruments from the wood. It's also a great carving wood for making toys and a whole bunch of other stuff. So yeah, here's black elderberry.
It's stinging nettle. Definitely a look but don't touch situation because this plant is covered in tiny little hairs on its leaves and its stem that cause your skin to get quite irritated if you touch it. But even with that, it's actually quite delicious. So you can pick it if you've got gloves on, and it's used once it's boiled or pulverized in things like soup, sometimes to flavor cheeses. I've even used it in ravioli filling, sometimes it's on pizza, and it can be even used to make tea. And it's quite nutritious. It actually has about 25% protein, which is a lot for a leaf like this. Now that it's flowered, it's not so good to eat because it's not as digestible, but during other times of year, in the springtime when it's sprung up, that's a great time to eat stinging nettle, as long as you're careful.
I'm Constance. I'm lying in a field of tar plant. This is one of my favorite plants. One of the things I like about it is that it has a very distinct smell. It's kind of lemony or turpentine-y. And check this out, the seeds are edible. And they're so sticky, when I get up out of this field of tar plant, there's gonna be seeds stuck all over me. This is California hazelnuts. One of the very distinctive things of this plant is the extremely soft, fuzzy leaves that feel very, very nice to touch. And if you're lucky, you might see some of the nuts forming as well. Now, this is a plant that has been heavily cultivated in the past by California Indians. What people would do would burn areas of hazelnut stands, which would cause them to grow back with these wonderful straight shoots that would be used for basketry. Now, when these areas are burned or cultivated through coppicing or pruning, they also produce many more hazelnuts. So if you cultivate hazelnut stands, they produce a lot more food. Wild hazelnuts that are not cultivated or tended tends to produce much less fruit.
Hey there. So behind me, we've got redwood sorrel. And redwood sorrel is a sour tasting, 3-leaved plant, a ground cover in the redwood forest that's related to sourgrass, which you may have eaten before. And redwood sorrel can be eaten in salads or just by itself. Now, something really cool about redwood sorrel is that when it gets too much sun on it, it'll actually fold up like an umbrella to preserve its moisture. So when you're out in the redwood forest, take a look for redwood sorrel.
the Western North American Rubus ursinus, commonly known by a suite of aliases, including the California blackberry, California dewberry, Douglas berry, Pacific berry, Pacific dewberry, and the trailing berry. Beware, blackberry fans. Where there's blackberry, there's commonly poison oak. To tell the difference, carefully look at the leaves. If it's hairy, it's a berry. Well, folks, thanks so much for joining us. We might have a few more moments for last minute questions. We're going to check the chat real quick. Constance, it looks like there's a few questions for you.
Oh, great. I did see the one question about hazelnut being a fruit. And in this context, I'm just using fruit, meaning the seed bearing structure of a flowering plant. So it's kind of a general term, not necessarily like an apple or a grapefruit or something, but the specific botanic definition.
All right, well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. So thanks for hanging with us tonight. Don't forget to come back next week. And don't forget, we still need your support during this closure. Have a great night, everybody. Good night.